Chapter 1. A Strange Visitor. The morning was cloaked in a heavy gray fog, the kind that pressed against the windows of 221B Baker Street like a restless ghost. Inside, the warmth of a quiet fire softened the chill, and Sherlock Holmes sat, long fingers steepled, lost in thought. I, Dr. Watson, was seated opposite him, the rustle of the newspaper in my hands the only sound cutting through the silence. "My dear fellow," Holmes said suddenly, "real life is infinitely stranger than anything we could invent." I looked up, mildly amused. "I don't believe that," I replied. "The stories in the papers are always dull. The same sad tales, told again and again." Holmes smiled, a glint of sharp intelligence in his eyes. "That's because newspapers report only the official side. What the magistrates say, what the police believe. But the truth, Watson, is often buried beneath the ordinary. The strange hides in the familiar." Before I could answer, he stood and moved to the window, peering through the mist toward the street below. "And now, if I'm not mistaken," he murmured, "something curious is about to walk through that very door." I joined him at the window. A woman stood across the street, frozen in hesitation. She clutched her coat, glanced up at the house, then down again, biting her lip. Her hands moved restlessly. Then suddenly, with a burst of determination, she crossed the street and rang the bell. Holmes turned to me with quiet certainty. "When a woman hesitates like that, Watson, it means she is torn between fear and hope. This isn't anger or desperation. This is confusion, a heart caught in a storm." A moment later, our housekeeper entered. "Miss Mary Sutherland, to see you, sir." She stepped into the room like a question that had not yet been asked. She was a large woman with soft, rounded features. Her eyes, half shielded behind spectacles, darted nervously. A red feather tipped her hat, dancing slightly with each movement. She wore gray gloves and a dark brown dress that bore the look of careful, modest effort. Holmes did not offer the usual pleasantries. Instead, with the precision of a man who saw through skin and silence, he said, "Isn't it difficult to type with such poor eyesight?" The woman gasped. "How did you—" "I see the marks from your spectacles on the bridge of your nose," he replied, with a light chuckle. "And your gloves show the faint ink stains of a typewriter ribbon." Miss Sutherland blinked, her confusion turning to awe. "I came," she said slowly, "because I need help. I want to know what happened to Mr. Husmer Angel. He disappeared, and no one seems to care." Holmes gestured toward the chair by the fire, and she sat, folding her gloved hands in her lap. Her voice trembled slightly. "I was angry this morning, furious really. My stepfather, Mr. Windybank, refused to go to the police, said it was all nonsense, that nothing bad had happened. But it wasn't nothing. He's gone. Hosmer's gone." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "Your stepfather," he said gently. "His name differs from yours. I presume he is not your blood relative?" "No, he's my stepfather," she said, her eyes dropping. "I call him father, but it's always felt strange. He's only 5 years older than me." The room held a sudden stillness, the firelight flickering across Holmes's face. I could see his mind already leaping ahead, turning pieces in his mental puzzle. "He married my mother shortly after my real father passed away," Mary continued. "My father was a plumber, and when he died, Mother ran the business. But when she married Mr. Windybank, he made her sell it." Holmes's voice was soft. "And your own income?" "I have a small inheritance from my uncle," she said. It gives me £100 a year. Though I give it to Mother, I earn what I need by typing." Holmes looked at her, his gaze kind but unwavering. "And now, tell us about Mr. Hosmer Angel." She hesitated, her fingers tightening. "It's difficult, but I will." And with that, the room was filled not just with the sound of her voice, but with the weight of a heart searching for answers in a world that had suddenly turned cold and unfamiliar. Chapter 2. The Man Called Hosmer Angel. The fire crackled gently as Miss Mary Sutherland leaned forward, her gloved fingers trembling slightly in her lap. Her voice, though soft, carried the unmistakable ache of someone trying to understand the unexplainable. "I met Mr. Hosmer Angel at the plumber's ball," she began. "They used to send tickets to my father every year. And after he passed, they sent them to Mother. Mr. Windybank didn't want us to go. He said Father's old friends weren't good enough for us." Her eyes dropped, shame mingled with quiet rebellion. "But the day of the ball, he left for France on business. So Mother and I went." Holmes nodded slowly, already seeing the shape of something hidden beneath her words. "That's where I met him," Mary said, a small, wistful smile tugging at her lips. "Hosmer Angel. He was so gentle, so proper. He asked for a walk after the ball. We talked. He said he worked in an office on Leadenhall Street." Holmes gently interjected, "Which office?" Mary blinked. I don't know. He never said. I never visited. We only ever met while my stepfather was away. He couldn't come to the house when Father was there. So we walked, or wrote letters." "Typed letters?" Holmes asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Yes," she nodded. "Always typed. He said handwritten letters were too personal to show at work. But when I offered to type mine too, he said it wouldn't be the same. He liked knowing the words came from me, not a machine." Her voice quivered now. "He was thoughtful that way. He noticed the small things. He said his voice was soft because of a childhood illness with his tonsils. He always wore dark glasses, just like me. We both had weak eyes." Watson and I exchanged a glance. "Too many convenient similarities," Mary continued, her voice now low and shaken. "He asked me to marry him after just one walk. I said yes, I suppose. I just felt safe with him." "And your mother approved?" Holmes asked. "She did," Mary nodded. "More than I did, honestly. She liked him from the start." Her voice grew distant, as if replaying memories through a fog. "He said we must marry quickly before Father returned from France. On the day of the wedding, he came to the house in a hansom cab. Mother and I got in. Hosmer said he would follow in another cab, but when we arrived at the church, he never came out." Her hands gripped each other tightly. "We waited and waited. The cabman said he had no idea where Mr. Angel went. He just vanished." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "It didn't make sense. That morning he made me promise on the Bible to always love him, to wait for him. He said, if anything happens to me, wait. And then he disappeared." The room was quiet for a long moment, filled only by the ticking of the clock above the hearth. Holmes stood, pacing slowly. "And your father? What did he say?" "He told me not to speak of Hosmer again. He said something terrible must have happened. But he believed Hosmer would come back." Holmes stopped, turning toward her. "Did Mr. Angel ever ask for money?" "No," she said firmly. "Not a single penny. I never even told him about my inheritance. He didn't know. I was certain of that." Holmes studied her face. Her pain was real. her confusion genuine. "And you still wait for him?" he asked gently. She smiled sadly. "Yes, Mr. Holmes. I believe he'll come back." "I must." Holmes stepped closer and took the newspaper clipping she offered, an advertisement she'd placed in hopes someone might recognize her vanished fiancé. "I'll look into it," he said quietly. "But Miss Sutherland, I must warn you. The truth may not be what you expect." Mary stood, smoothing her gloves. "Whatever it is, I need to know." And with that, she turned and left the room, her silhouette vanishing into the misty light of the street, leaving behind only questions and the scent of sorrow. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Letters. The morning fog had thickened over Baker Street, casting long gray shadows that danced along the walls. Sherlock Holmes sat motionless in his chair, eyes closed, fingertips pressed together beneath his chin. I knew this look. His mind was no longer in the room but far away, dissecting every word Miss Mary Sutherland had said. Without opening his eyes, he finally spoke. "Watson, there is no Hosmer Angel." I turned to him, startled. "What do you mean?" He opened his eyes now, calm but piercing. "There is only a disguise, a carefully crafted illusion, and the truth has been hiding in plain sight all along." He rose and moved to his desk, lifting a bundle of papers. "Look at these," he said, handing me several neatly folded letters. They were all typed. Not just the body of the letters, but the signatures too. No flowing ink, no personal touch. Just the cold, impersonal press of typewriter keys. "No man in love signs a letter to his fiancée with a typewriter," Holmes muttered. "It may seem like a small detail, Watson, but small details are often the loudest clues." I looked more closely. The font is identical. Every letter exactly the same. Precisely. And not just identical in style, Holmes added, but in flaw. He pointed to the capital R, slightly misaligned, with a faint smudge at its base. That imperfection appears in all the letters. It tells us that all were typed on the same machine. Now, here is the reply I received from Mr. Windybank's employer. He handed me a formal letter. I described Mr. Hosmer Angel's appearance, leaving out the glasses, mustache, and whispered voice, and asked if such a man worked in their firm. I read the letter. My eyes widened. "They say the description matches Mr. James Windybank exactly." Holmes nodded. He was Hosmer Angel. The disguise was laughably simple. A whisper, a pair of dark glasses, and a false mustache. But it worked, because Miss Sutherland trusted too easily and asked too few questions. He walked to the window, parting the curtain with one hand. Outside, carriages rolled through the slush, London's heart beat slow and damp. She never visited his office. He refused to give her an address. He vanished on the day of their wedding, stepping into a cab and out through the opposite door, never to return. Holmes turned back to me. He played her emotions like a violin, promised love, demanded devotion, made her swear to wait for him forever, all to ensure she would never give her heart or her money to another man. "Cruel," I said softly. "Heartless." "Indeed," Holmes replied, "but clever, diabolically clever." He returned to his writing table, opening a fresh sheet of paper. "I'm writing 2 letters, one to Windybank's employer to confirm what we already know, and another to Windybank himself." "To invite him here?" I asked. Holmes smiled faintly. "Exactly. Tomorrow at 6. He believes he's the cat in this game. Let's show him the mouse is faster." The clock ticked on, steady and cold. Outside, The fog swallowed the street lamps one by one. Inside, the truth was beginning to take shape, built not on what was said, but on what had been carefully left unsaid. And in Holmes' hands, even shadows had nowhere left to hide. Chapter 4. The Mask Behind the Name. The next evening, as the clock in Baker Street struck a calm and deliberate 6, Sherlock Holmes stood by the fireplace, eyes on the door, mind several steps ahead. The letters had been sent. The trap was set. Now they only had to wait. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow, confident, unaware. The door creaked open. A tall man stepped in, clean-shaven, dressed in formal black. His skin was pale, his expression tight, his eyes a steely gray. It was Mr. James Windybank, Mary Sutherland's stepfather. "Good evening," he said, his voice clipped and impatient. "I understand you've been troubled by my stepdaughter's little misunderstanding." Holmes offered no greeting. He simply held up a sheet of paper. "This is the letter you sent me to confirm your arrival. Typed, of course, just like every letter Hosmer Angel ever wrote." Windybank's fingers twitched. "I must say," Holmes continued, circling him like a hawk, "your typewriter is quite distinctive. 14 unique flaws. A damaged R, a faint double press on the lowercase e, easily traceable." Windybank laughed nervously. "Surely you're not suggesting I had anything to do with this Hosmer Angel fellow?" Holmes stopped. His voice dropped to a deadly calm. "You are Hosmer Angel." The words hung in the room like smoke. Windybank's face turned white. "I've caught many criminals," Holmes said, "but rarely one so cold-blooded or so cowardly." "I did nothing illegal," Windybank snapped, backing toward the door. "No," Holmes said softly, "only something unforgivable." He stepped forward and locked the door. "You took advantage of a woman's loneliness. You created a fantasy to keep her under your roof, because once she married, her inheritance would leave with her. You paraded as a lover to keep her from ever becoming someone else's bride." Holmes's voice rose. "You disappeared on her wedding day, made her wait for a man who never existed. You stole her future, not her money, not her possessions, but something far more fragile. Her faith." Windybank collapsed into the nearest chair, pale and shaking. "It was just a game," he muttered. "We didn't think she'd fall in love." "But she did," Holmes snapped. "And you let her. You pushed her to swear loyalty, fed her promises wrapped in lies, knowing you would vanish before she ever reached the altar." He turned toward me, his eyes blazing. "Watson, this man dressed in shadows and called it affection. He disguised his control as care." Windybank tried to stand, but Holmes blocked him. "You have committed no crime, Mr. Windybank. The law cannot touch you. But if there were justice for cruelty—" He let the words trail off as he opened the door. Windybank darted out, like a rat freed from a trap. Holmes stood silent for a long moment, then turned to me. His face was unreadable. "There are masks, Watson," he said, "that hide monsters. And some are made not of cloth, but of charm." Outside, the wind howled down Baker Street. Inside, the room was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock, marking the end of one illusion and the beginning of truth. Chapter 5. Truth Behind Locked Doors. The wind outside howled like a restless spirit, but inside 221 B Baker Street, the silence was deeper than any storm. Mr. James Windybank had fled. His footsteps had echoed down the stairs and vanished into the London night. Holmes stood still by the door, his hand resting loosely on the handle, his face lit only by the soft glow of the fireplace. But the fire in his eyes told another story, one of quiet fury. I looked at him, waiting for his thoughts. "Watson," he said, barely above a whisper, "sometimes the most unforgivable crimes are committed behind the safest walls, by the people we trust the most." He crossed the room and took a seat near his desk, where a small bundle of letters lay, the ones from Hosmer Angel, typed, cold, devoid of personality, except for one signature detail that had revealed everything. "I knew from the beginning," Holmes continued, "that this was not a tale of love gone wrong, but of control hidden under the mask of affection." He picked up one of the letters and held it to the light. No real man would sign a love letter with a typewriter. The case had been easy for him, obvious even, but that didn't make it any less painful. For somewhere, not far from Baker Street, a young woman named Mary Sutherland still sat by a window, waiting, hoping, believing in a man who never truly existed. "She won't believe the truth," I said softly. Holmes nodded. Number. To her, Hosmer Angel was real, gentle, kind, the promise of something better. If I show her the truth, I take all that away and leave her with nothing. I thought about her, how her hands trembled, how her eyes searched for answers she didn't really want, and how the man who called himself her protector had made her a prisoner instead. "She will wait for him, won't she?" I asked. Holmes gave a faint, bitter smile. "Yes, for years perhaps, and he'll go on, untouched by law, free to live comfortably while she holds on to shadows." He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the fog-slick streets. "It's dangerous," he murmured, "to take a tiger cub from its mother, but it is just as dangerous to take a delusion from a woman." The case was closed. The facts had been laid bare. But Holmes had not written to Mary. He had not summoned her for a final explanation. He had locked the truth away behind careful words and unspoken pity. Because sometimes even the greatest detective cannot undo the damage done by love twisted into lies. The door remained open behind us. But the truth, that stayed locked away behind a heart that still believed.